Where that book's at? If you find the book of Micah or before that, Obadiah, Amos, right in that vicinity, right in the middle of your Bible, a little book called Nahum. That's where we're going this morning. And I want to speak to you on this thought, seeing God through a storm. And of course, the message is going to be related to what's going on down south and what's happened out in Texas. But it's seeing God through it all. Is God in that storm that's coming in? We're going to talk about it. Nahum chapter 1. And I'd like to begin reading with verse 2. It's going to start out kind of strange. God is jealous, and the Lord revengeth. The Lord revengeth. It's repeated twice here. And is furious. The Lord will take vengeance on his adversaries, and he reserveth wrath for his enemies. The Lord is slow to anger and great in power, and will not at all acquit the wicked. The Lord hath his way in the whirlwind, that's the hurricane, and in the storm. And the clouds are the dust of his feet. He rebuketh the sea, and maketh it dry, and drieth up all the rivers. Bashan languisheth, and Carmel, and the flowers of Lebanon languish. The mountains quake at him, and the hills melt, and the earth is burned up at his presence. Yea, the world and all that dwell therein. Who can stand before the indignation? And who can abide in the fierceness of his anger? His fury is poured out like fire, and the rocks are thrown down by him. The Lord is good, a stronghold in the day of trouble, and he knoweth them that trust in him. But with an overcoming flood, he will make an utter end of the place thereof, and the darkness shall pursue his enemies. What do ye imagine against the Lord? He will make an utter end. Affliction shall not rise up the second time. For while they beholdeth together as thorns, and while they are drunken as drunkards, they shall be devoured as stubble fully dry. Father, I understand and realize, God, the fact that your creation has seemed to have forgotten that you're even there. And if we're not careful, Lord, we can ignore you ourselves. And I pray through the message this morning and through the word here of Nahum, the prophet, might we see, dear Lord, the fact that you are a jealous God, and all the things that your creation has thrown in your face, seemingly forgotten you, Father, is not going to continue forever. And I just pray today, Father, for whatever good that can come out of these storms. First Harvey out there in Texas, and now Inez, and or Irma rather. And I just pray, Father, that some good will come from all of this. I pray that souls might be made aware that you're God, and you're on the throne. And Father, I pray that there will be those that will turn to you through it all. God, I pray you bless the message now this morning. Speak to our hearts, I pray, in Christ's name. And amen. People all over this nation I believe, have watched with interest, and I know I have. One time I could. I missed the football game last night, failing to even realize it was on, but I was more interested in seeing what was happening with this storm. Usually we get up in the morning, and the first thing I do is watch David Jeremiah on his program. It's on at 7 o'clock on Sunday mornings, and then there's another preacher that we watch, then Charles Stanley. I always like to get into his programming. But this morning, I didn't even watch that. I was watching with interest as these storms, or this storm, Irma, is coming bearing down on the Florida, southern tip of Florida down there. It's only a 4 right now. They said it could have been as high as a 5. That means that they thought that perhaps it was going to come in with 185 mile an hour winds. And the way that thing is circling, it's taken in and affecting the whole state of Florida, and going to leave there and come forward further up the coastline. It's going to go into Georgia, and then South Carolina, and then North Carolina. You see, Hurricane Irma comes pressing down upon them, and my question, what's going on? Why these storms? Does anyone know? Oh, we got one. You hear about him, Al Gore. He comes on and he tells us, he gives us a reason why we're having all of this phenomena that's going on in our world right now. It's because of us. You are to blame, and I'm to blame. You don't say anything about him being to blame. He gets in his jets and flies all over the country, but he blames us. But you know what? He may be right. He may be right. We may be the cause. But I don't believe it's for the same reason that Mr. Gore is talking about. Listen to the media, and we hear of all kind of blame and who and what is behind it all. But I want to ask the question this morning, has anyone heard where God is being blamed for these storms? I don't think that I haven't heard where anybody is blaming God for it. I do know that there's a lot of people that are crying out to God. Now, maybe there's a reason why they're not blaming God, and that reason might be that they don't even acknowledge that He is God. And as I read here in Nahum, this is what was happening with the children of Israel. They had forgotten their God. And I think America has forgotten her God. I don't think we acknowledge that He even exists. And when I say we, I'm talking as a nation now. I would like to stand up and shout as loud as I can shout it out. Take a good look, people, and see the power of God at work. Now, we say, maybe it's the devil doing this. Well, maybe he might have his hand in it, but I want to tell you this, that only God is able to control what's going on out there. Whether He brought about the storm or just allowed the storm, and sometimes He does this, He's the only one that can control the storms. It could have been a Category 5. It could have even, it could have blown the whole state of Florida clear off the map and covered it all with water. And the same be true of Texas with Harvey, who brought about the storm in Job's life. That Satan, we know, was behind it all. Remember the story of Job when Satan came to God, and God asked Satan, have you considered my servant Job? And Job said, Satan said, yeah, I've considered him, but you got a hedge built around him. And God said, okay, Satan, if you want, you go ahead and take care of it. Now you can touch everything he has, you can have him all, but you can't touch his life. That belongs to me. Only God could control life. And Job, he was put through the furnace. We all know that. And let me turn back to the 37th chapter of the book of Job, Job 37. And let me just read something here concerning Job and the fury that happened in his life. In Job 37, and you have to pardon me till I finger through this new Bible of mine, chapter 37, starting with verse 14. Hearken unto this, O Job, stand still and consider the wondrous works of God. Doeth thou know when God disposeth them and calls the light of his cloud to shine? Doest thou know the balancing of the cloud? The wondrous works of him which is perfect in knowledge, how thy garment is worn, the garments is worn when he quieteth the earth by the south wind. Hast thou with him spread out the sky, which is strong as a molten looking glass? Teach us that we shall say unto him, for we cannot order our speech by reason of darkness. Verse 22, fair weather cometh out of the north, which with God is a terrible majesty. Touching the Almighty, we cannot find him out. He is excellent in power and in judgment and in plenty of justice. He will not afflict. Men do therefore fear him. He respecteth not any that are wise of heart. In other words, what Job is saying here is, people, we need to acknowledge the fact that God is God. Now, you listen to me this morning. If we can't see God in all of his majesty, and he's there all around us. I seen him yesterday, bringing the people together and getting out here and working, rolling up sleeves and getting out here and getting to work to do what can be done to beautify this property that God has put into our hands. And I thank God for the people. I thank God for you. And but there's so many today that do not see God any place. And when they don't see him, what God has to do sometime is he has to make himself seeable. He has to open up some clouds and let some rain fall or storm of whatever variety. And even hurricanes. I would say that there are people out there today that are praying this week that wasn't even thinking about praying last week or a week before last. Do you see God at work? Are we witnessing his mighty works? Chuck Swindoll tells a story that I like to share, and every now and then I thought about it, about a little girl who walked beside of her mother in a cloud thunderstorm. And every time the lightning flashed, the little girl would look at her mother and put a big smile on her face. And their mother asked her, honey, she said, why do you smile every time the lightning flashes? And the little girl said, well, since God is taking my picture, I want to make sure I smile at him. The little girl can see God and smile, but do we see God? Do we ever see him? Do we understand that God is there? And do we even care that he's there? We better. Do we understand who controls the weather? And by the way, it's not Mother Nature. We often hear, I hear it every time I turn television on, Mother Nature sure through her wrath. It's not Mother Nature, it's Almighty God. And we better acknowledge that. Sometimes he has to bring judgment. We know that. But let's understand that we've all been affected by the weather sometimes in our life. I think back of myself. I've never been in a hurricane. And for all of your benefits here today, I just want to go on record saying I don't want to ever be in one. I'd probably been the first one out of the state of Texas, or to be honest with you, I don't even want to be down there when they're even talking that. Few years back, it's been several years now, I had the privilege of going to the Bahamas. And we were over there, and the first thing that we got to do when we got out, we got to meet missionaries we went there to see, and they promised me that they was going to take me fishing. And boy, I thought that's going to be nice. Just to be in the Bahamas, for one thing, I'd have to tell you the story how I got there. I mean, I was going through all kind of trouble at church, and everything was caving in on me. I had 18 people up and walk out of the church and left me with a skeleton crew with a big debt over our heads and all of the things that can go on. I don't want to get into all that. But I got a phone call from over in West Virginia that my friend had just passed away. He said to me, Don, the phone rang when I got home. He said, would you like to go to the Bahamas? And I said, Brother Mac, you know you're talking to Don Knoll. I can't afford to go to Portsmouth. How in the world could I go to the Bahamas? And he said, did I ask you if you could afford? And I said, well, how am I going to get there? He said, can you drive over here to West Virginia? And I said, well, I guess I could afford to get there if I had to. And he said, well, I'm asking you to come over. Next Sunday, we're going to be having our service here. I want you to come and preach. And he said, then on Monday, we're going to load up in a plane, and we're going to the Bahamas. And I said, who's going to pay for it? He said, well, I got a lady in the church, and she has said that she would send 8 people to the Bahamas if they wanted to go to see this missionary. And I can't get 8 people out of my church who will get on that plane and go. I've got 4 my teenage boys that said they would go, and I'm going. And he said, if you'd like to go, the seats there available for you. And I said, I'll be there. He got over and got on that plane. We went to the Bahamas. And I was out there on that blue water, and we got to go out and fish, and I was really excited. And then we got called in, and the pilot said, we got to get off this island. And I said, why? Where are we going? I said, why do we got to leave? We got 4 more days here. I got to preach a couple times there, and he said, we got to get out because there's a hurricane coming this way. I said, wait till I get my bag. I'm ready to climb on that plane, and let's get the hoisting out of here and get back home. I don't like hurricanes. And, I've never, as I said, I've never been, but I have been, and I've seen tornadoes. As a matter of fact, I seen the one back in the 60s. I watched it as it circled right up the Ohio River, right past us, headed for Wheelersburg. I don't remember. I do remember an ice storm. You all probably can remember that one. It broke down all the trees and really crippled things around here. And I remembered a snowstorm that put 4 foot of snow in my driveway when my mother was having a heart attack, and I couldn't get the ambulance up there. And I had 400 feet of driveway to shovel out, to get the ambulance. And I had to do it by myself, 4 foot high. I want to tell you something. That's a lot of snow to shovel. And I done it in a day's time so I could get the ambulance up there. Some people ask me, said, how in the world can you live to be as old as what you are? Well, I've had to work. And I don't think work has killed anybody. But anyway, getting back, I've seen snowstorms. And I can say I've been in a few bad rainstorms, but whether trivial or traumatic, we sometimes or somehow just want to write it off as just a happening or maybe we've been victims of some unlucky experience. Now, I don't know whether you believe in luck or not. I don't think anything happens by luck. I think things happen because God allows things to happen in our life. If all truth is known, even we Christians, we sometimes think like an unbelieving world. Now, is it right or wrong to give blame or to give credit to God for whatever happens in the way of storms? Well, let's just go to the Bible. Let's ask Amos. He's another prophet that I could have turned to this morning. But in Amos chapter 4, verse 7, let me just give you a verse here. It says, I, talking about God, I have withholden the rain from you when there was 3 months to the harvest, and I caused it to rain upon one city. One piece was rained upon, and the piece therewith it rained not, withered. Now listen, God admitted to it. I was the one that withheld the rain, and I didn't give it to you for 3 months. And then then comes the harvest, and guess what? It all withered up. There wasn't any. You see, whether good or bad is from the hand of God. It comes from Him. And whether we understand this truth or we don't understand it, we will come to understand that we are never just victims. It's been said, and I believe this, it may be that we cannot stay out of a storm, but we can make sure that the storm stays out of us. I think Kyra pointed out to me, I didn't hear it, but one official, I don't know where it's a congressman or somebody from down in Florida, made this statement. Maybe it was one of the mayors. It says that we can help you rebuild your house, but we cannot give you back your life. So be cautious, be careful. There's a storm coming. They've seen it for a week now or over, and God's given them many, many hours, many days and nights to prepare either to get out of there or get ready for it. It's going to happen. So the question, why does God allow what one can be referred to as natural disasters? Sometimes He does so to bring judgment. And I believe that if there's a nation under whatever you might say about it, conditions being right for judgment, it's the United States of America. We've thumbed our nose at God. We paid little or no attention to Him. I wasn't a bit surprised when, was it Irene? It hit, my mind just went blank when that ungodly place down there in New Orleans got blasted. Katrina. It did surprise me a little bit. Why not? Those people, ungodly in the way they lived. But what about Texas? And what about Florida? And I think about, and Kyra and I have been praying hard about the people, Christian brothers and sisters that are there. God, please protect them, keep them safe. But sometimes He brings judgment. In Amos chapter 4, verse 9, it says this, I have smitten you with blasting and mildew. Hey, Texans, do you hear that? I brought this mildew, God says, that you're trying to tear out of your house now and get rid of, throw all that stuff away. When your gardens and your vineyards and your fig trees and your olive trees increased, the palmer worm devoured them. But God's talking to Israel here, but He could be talking to those that are out there or down there or even right here when He says, and ye have refused unto me, or ye have not returned unto me, saith the Lord. You haven't come to me. God sometimes has to put us on our backs or put us on to get us on our knees. You see, God told Israel what would happen to them if they didn't obey. You see, and I want us to know this morning, God owes us nothing. He don't owe me nothing. He don't owe you nothing. You say, well, I think he does. No, he don't. He don't owe any of us anything. Do you understand this? But we owe him everything. We owe him everything. And if we keep taking his blessings and fail to love him and serve him, don't be surprised when he comes down upon us and says, that's it. That's enough. I'm not taking no more. But wait, not all those that have lost everything they have are being judged. Are they? I don't think so. The count is well up into the millions already that have lost homes and possessions out in Texas, cars and furniture. And I've seen furniture stacked and automobiles stacked up on top of one another. And some of them even lost their businesses where they can't even go to work and they don't have a business to even go to work at any longer. Well, Jesus said he causes the sun to shine on the evil and the good and sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. The tornado that tore through our county back in the 60s. Many lost their homes, I will say. You remember that up in Wheelersburg especially? I seen that devastation. You remember it all? But who was it that lost their lives? Have you thought about that? I can't remember whether there's 5 or just 3 that died in that tornado. But I do know this, whether it was 3 or 5, every one of them that lost their life was Christian. Did you know that? And I knew 2 of them personally. Good, godly, Christian people. Why? Why did God allow that storm to come in and kill some of his people, God's people? You know what happened when they got killed? They went on to heaven right now. And God left the wicked here upon this earth, or up on in that section of our county, to maybe a second chance to get right with him. You see, what about physical afflictions? And we've all gone through them. We've all had our days in the hospital, our nights spending there. And we question, is God sovereign over all the aspects of nature? And of course he is. Is he in control of our physical bodies? And the answer to that question is yes, he is. He controls our physical as well. Now, if he knows every hair that's on our head, he surely knows about our pains that we have, does he not? Cancer strikes people who apparently have done everything possible to guard against it. I had a funeral a couple weeks ago, now, a week ago last Tuesday, of this pastor friend of mine whose son lives down in Florida. He got 2 sons lives down there. And the one son, the good son, the one that goes to church or was going to church, his wife, who's never smoked in her life and never took a drink of alcohol of any kind in her life, has come down with that liver disease. It's her liver's has been completely eat up. Now, Mac has another son that's nothing but a total alcoholic, and he's a drunk. He was drunk at the funeral. Well, why did God pick on the son who goes to church and his wife? She's lived a good life. Well, you see, that's all in God's providence. God knows things that we don't know. And we come and we ask the question, why? Sometimes we're not given the reason why. You see, I don't know why God took my daughter-in-law when she was only 35 years of age, had a young son to raise, only 14 years of age. And why God called Donna home, I don't know. I watched her battle cancer for 3 years. I seen her leading souls to Christ, even while she was battling cancer. And there's people going to go to heaven because she got cancer. And I remember on Monday before she died on Thursday, her calling us to her side, and especially my wife, and saying to her, I want you to take my son and I want you to raise him. And I remember going to a pastor friend of mine and saying, I can't understand this. It's just not right that grandparents ought to have to raise their children. This is not the best way. And that pastor looked me right in the eye and he said, I want to tell you something, mister. He said, in this case, it is the best way. You better be thankful that God's given you the right and the privilege to raise your grandchild, because who else? Mom's been called home. I didn't understand it. I didn't understand why my son-in-law, a preacher, a new daddy with a little girl, a little baby that they had just adopted, 3 years of age. Why I get a phone call on Monday morning, 3 o'clock in the morning, saying, Dad, come, Dan's down. And I get there, and to grab that baby up, take her, throw her in my wife's arms back here in Medford, and run all the way back down to the hospital to walk in. And there stands John Gowdy, the pastor at Temple, walking back and forth. And he looked in my head. He said, it's terrible, isn't it? I didn't understand that my son-in-law was laying back there a corpse now, Don. I go in, his mom and his dad and my sister, my son and my daughter is sitting there crying, and my son trying to console the family. And I remember sitting down between them and I said, is Dan gone? It's gone? I couldn't believe it. Not Dan. Somebody else's son-in-law, somebody else's child, but not mine. God, why? Why? You know what? God didn't give me the answer. It's none of my business what he chooses to do. Why did my sister live most of her life not even knowing who she was most of the time? I recall going to Albuquerque, New Mexico, walking in the house to see my sister, who I hadn't seen for several years, several months at least. Just a young lady. And her husband, who sits here, he'll be here next Sunday, Lord willing, David Keeney. He said to his wife, my sister, do you know who this is? She looked up at me and she said, yeah, that's Donald Lee Knoll, Route 2, Medford, Ohio. That was my address back then. She knew me as an address. She didn't know what she was even talking about. Her husband would come home. My sister would maybe cut all the curtains off of the window. He's come home many times and there would be a button on his shirt. And she would take scissors, cut his clothes up. And she thought she was doing work. And she didn't even have a good mind. 3 children. She drowned in a bathtub in a rest home because they put her in there and she went under the water and nobody was watching her. She drowned. Me and my 2 brothers and my sister from Missouri drove all the way to Albuquerque to have her funeral. And I had her committal service, and I walked away from the cemetery, not realizing that her youngest son was still there on the premise, and he looked up at God. And he said, I dare you to take my mommy! I dare you, God! I didn't hear about it until afterwards. 1 week later, he was driving his milk truck, and it, for no reason at all, they don't even know why, it turned over. didn't tear it up or anything. Just rolled it over, this 18-wheeler that he was driving. And the airbag come out and pushed him against the steering wheel. And he's smothered right there. 39 years of age. I dare you, God. No, you don't dare God at anything. We don't understand storms. We don't know why storms comes into our life. And really, it's none of our business, is it? Well, my daughter and my son-in-law couldn't have children. And so Dan and Joyce, they get the news that this lady is going to have a little baby. And my son-in-law had already made preparations to go to Russia to buy a little boy. He wanted a boy with a bad heart because he had a bad heart. He was going to raise a son. And this woman, she tried 5 times to abort my little great-granddaughter, or my granddaughter, rather. She's no kin to me. But my daughter and my son-in-law adopted her. She was 3 years old. And God took Dan. You and I both know of people who have children that don't even want them. And why would God take my son-in-law away from his precious little newborn baby girl, 3 years of age? Understand it? No, I don't. But I do know this. I can promise you that I do know this, that God is in control of all things. He's in control of these tornadoes that's happening. There's another one, by the way. It's on its way, and we don't know where it's going to hit. My question to us is, do we serve a big God or a little God? How big is our God? 2 or 3 weeks ago, it was Harvey. Now it's Irma. Does God have to bring a bigger storm to get our attention? Many may not see him, that is, may not see God. But I want to tell us all this morning, we better see him. We better see him. Is there a lesson in this for all of us? And I believe there is. Can we not see God's mercy here? I can. People have been given much warning. This reminds me of the warning that's concerning what lies ahead for those who have been told about the coming judgment. Jesus is coming. I believe that with all my heart. That's the reason why I'm standing here this morning. If I didn't believe it, I'd chuck my Bible up, I'd walk away, I'd just go out and find me something else to do and twiddle my thumbs like so many others. But I know that he's coming. And when he comes, I know that we're going to stand before him. I'm going to stand before him. But you know what? Preachers have stood in pulpits and standing in pulpits across this nation, trying to warn people, telling them that, listen, there is a heaven to gain. We can go to heaven one of these days when we leave this life, and we can go to a far better place where there'll be no storms and no more heartaches and no more aches and no more pains. But there's also a hell to shun. We might not be able to stay out of God's storm, but for our own sake and for God's glory, let's not let the storm stay in us. We can get rid of it. But my question this morning as I close is, what is God going to have to do in my life? What's he going to have to do in us to get us to the place where he will be given the privilege to care for us? Do you love him this morning? Do you know that he is real, that he's there for you? If you're here and not saved this morning, my plea, my prayer would be, get saved right now. Don't wait. I'm glad when I was 17 years of age And that goes clear back 67 years ago. 60, a little longer than that. Right across the parking lot here, the little frame church out here. 17-year-old boy come to church, not to find God, but to see a girl. But sitting there in the back of that church, a little old church, it wasn't any bigger than one section of these seats right here. When I heard the gospel message for the first time, the preacher gave an invitation, and I came and fell on my face. And I've never been sorry since that day. I love him this morning, do you? I trust him this morning, do you? And I respect him this morning, do you? Do we? Oh, Father, you're a great big God, not a little puny God. We see this storm come in, and God, we're only reminded, Father,